Hello and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman.
This week on Heroic Media, 4 years ago, Obama promised there would be no federal funding of abortion. A new report reveals otherwise.
A new poll by the Pew Research Center shows a drop in support for same-sex marriage.
A recent celebrity wedding highlights the important role of marriage in the upbringing of children.
Stay tuned for all these stories and more here on Heroic Media. So here at Heroic Media, we discuss news headlines that deal with issues of family and marriage and life. And we focus on those types of issues because they're so foundational, they're so fundamental to everything that society is built on.
Right. They're really important to society. And
Absolutely.
Oftentimes, the stories that we'll cover will revolve around abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and homosexual marriage.
Exactly.
So what's our first story?
Thanks, Patrick. First for today. Pro-life Republicans and Democrats alike are speaking out after a report finding federal funding of abortion in healthcare plans across the country. This violates a 2010 executive order from President Obama.
Man, I knew it was too good to be true.
Right? Okay, so to give our viewers a little bit of background, back in 2010, there was this huge debate over this big healthcare law, the Affordable Care Act, this major piece of legislation. And it was getting close to passing, but they didn't have enough support because there was this handful of pro-life Democrats, about a dozen people, who said, we won't vote for this if it allows for public abortion funding in these new healthcare plans.
Right.
And so in order to get this to pass, President Obama said, okay, well, I will sign an executive order that says no federal funding for abortion in these healthcare plans created under these new exchanges. And so these people agreed, many of them agreed, not all of them, and so it got the support it needed, and the healthcare law passed, the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
But at the time, the U.S. bishops and a number of other pro-life groups said, wait a second, that executive order is not enough. It's not going to do anything from a legal standpoint because of the way that the separation of powers in the United States government. The Congress passes a law, the president signs it, but the president can't then go in and make changes and revisions and add stuff through executive orders. That's not how it works. So they said, look, this is not actually going to do anything. This is not sufficient. So now, fast forward 4 years, and just in the middle of September, the Government Accountability Office, which is this independent watchdog group, comes up with this report and says, oh, guess what? Abortion coverage is being federally funded in over 1,000 healthcare plans through these exchanges.
Yeah, so that's really disappointing. I mean, first of all, I think it was very deceptive of Obama to do that. I mean, I'm sure he knew full well that it wasn't.
He was a constitutional law professor.
Yeah,
I mean,
he had to have known.
He knows how the Constitution works.
It was another one of those scenarios just where it was like it's a smokescreen. You know, it's just like it's doing something. It's just like pro-abortion supporters, you know, pro-choice. It was like the usage of words or certain actions make you seem like you're doing something, but really it's not doing anything to the actual truth of the situation. So that was disappointing. That was the first thing that was disappointing. Because you never want to, I mean, obviously politics is pretty ugly on both sides. It doesn't matter whether you're Democrat or Republican, which is another point I like to make too. Not all, although it tends to lean towards a lot of Democrats tend to support abortion, not all of them do. So it's nice to know that, you know, these 12 or so Democrats were so against the public funding of abortion through the new Health Care Act. So.
Yeah, and you know, even after this news came out, Democrats and Republicans stood up and said, wait a second, this is a problem.
Right.
And so Dan Lipinski, he's actually a congressman from Illinois. He's a very prominent pro-life Democrat, and he's Catholic, and he really, you can see in a lot of the decisions that he makes, he's really putting his faith into action.
Nice.
And so he was one of the ones that said, you know, all of this is completely unacceptable, and he was one of the Democrats who continued to oppose the Affordable Care Act because he said, look, this separation of the accounting stuff, he called it an accounting gimmick. He said, this is still going to end up funding it. I can't in good conscience vote for it.
Right.
So you have him, and then Chris Smith, he's a Republican from New Jersey,
Okay.
and Lipinski and Smith are the co-chairs of a pro-life group within the House of Representatives. So you have
Nice.
sort of this sort of efforts within Congress to support it. And Chris Smith said that he had written a letter in August asking Obama specific questions about how this was being implemented because there's no transparency. It was so difficult to even figure out if an individual plan was covering
Well, you have to
abortion.
pass it so you can find out what's in it, right? That was one of the things that cracked me up about the whole Affordable Care Act and it being presented and everything. But yeah, it's so complex.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's really annoying about these laws too. It seems like they're just buried under paperwork or around legal terms and all these different things, and it's just hiding what exactly we knew would happen, and that's that thousands of insurance policies are covering abortion by taxpayer funding.
Yep.
And so it's just really annoying, is really what the only word I can use to describe it. It's very frustrating. And one of the things that comes to mind every time I hear a scenario like this where something that President Obama has put into place that supports abortion or homosexual marriage or anything like that. I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I had with people before the election, both elections, and it was very clear based on his track record that he was a pro-abortion supporter, and and it's like, I mean, the proof is in the pudding now. There's no denying it absolutely now by all of the things that he's done. But we just have to remember that when we elect these officials too, whether you're Democrat or Republican or anything, that we elect officials that stand for life and stand for good values, first and
Absolutely.
foremost.
Yeah, we have a duty as voters to do that.
Exactly.
And one positive note that's come out of this, now that there's attention to this, there can really be a focus to try to counter it. And there's a piece of legislation called the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act.
Nice.
It's actually been in the works way before this report came out, but it's getting some more attention now.
That's
and
good.
it's an attempt by the pro-life members of Congress to explicitly go in through an act of Congress and say, no, you can't have the funding for abortion in these plans under the exchanges. And by doing it through a law, they would actually be able to have a legal effect on the previous law because that's how the system works.
Nice.
So this has gotten more than 150 members of Congress supporting it.
Great.
The U.S. bishops have spoken out in favor of it. So that's one possible way to sort of go back and correct this problem.
Excellent. That's awesome. I think that hopefully everything goes well with this. We can pass the law and hopefully be done with this taxpayer-funded abortion. Yep. All right. In our next story, a new survey conducted by the Pew Research Center shows that the public sees religion's influence as waning, yet it also shows a growing appetite for religion's role in politics. So I thought that was interesting.
Very interesting.
At face value, it's like, well, that seems kind of opposite. But once you get into kind of the statistics of which there were a lot of statistics that were unearthed in this survey, it makes sense because, I guess, to kind of summarize things, as people, it's almost like people are realizing, oh my gosh, religion's influence is waning so much that we need to really do something about it. And so it seems like the appetite for, based on these survey results, that people are wanting it more.
Right.
Although its influence is seen as waning, right?
It's an interesting combination of statistics. And then some of the other things that were brought up in this survey were really interesting too. Some of the views on same-sex marriage and on homosexuality. So, there's this narrative out there that the support for same-sex marriage keeps growing and growing and growing and growing. And sort of there's this impression everyone supports same-sex marriage out these days. And
that's not the case.
And that's not what it found. It actually found that 49% are in favor of same-sex marriage, and that's down 5 points from a survey that Pew did in February. So, and that's outside of the margin of error. So there's really something going on there. And Pew's statement on this was that it's too early to know if this modest decline is an anomaly or if it's the beginning of a reversal or a plateau of attitudes towards gay marriage. So there could be something changing. We don't know yet. But just this media presentation that, there's this overwhelming support of gay marriage. Actually, this is saying that less than half of people are in support of this.
Right, yeah, absolutely. I thought another interesting finding was that it really, the results reflected kind of this widening gap between people who are religiously affiliated and people who are not.
Interesting.
And I see that is happening across, every decade. It seems like fewer and fewer people are associating with religion. And it's almost like a slow kind of, I think there's so many components to why that is. A lot of it, I think, has to do with like the breakdown of marriage and family, and thus, I think marriage is inherently tied to religion, and I think that without that marriage being intact, that certain religious aspects are not being taught to their children, or they see by example of their parents that, religion doesn't really matter that much,
Right.
So it's kind of been disintegrating over time. So it kind of makes sense how this is happening. And, in a society that's so, advanced or whatever, people feel like, I don't need religion, what religion teaches has been proven wrong or is just ridiculous, or, there's no way to prove certain things. And, and I think that, because of the way that mainstream media portrays things about religion, and it just only furthers that gap.
Right, and I think it'll be interesting. What I'm interested to see is whether that pendulum is going to swing back the other way, because you have fewer and fewer people saying they're religious, but at the same time you sort of have this rise of the, I'm spiritual but not religious, because people do have that need and that desire. They have the infinite hole in their heart that's longing for God, so they're going to fill it with something.
Right.
And the things that they're filling it with are very empty.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if at a certain point people are just going to say, wait a second, at a certain point when you see generations growing up with nothing and this emptiness, if that's going to sort of start to move back the other direction and have people say, wait a second, what is it that my grandparents or maybe my great-grandparents had that brought meaning to their lives?
Absolutely.
I don't know. We'll see if that happens.
Yeah, we'll see if that happens. I agree. And I think also that, we as Catholics and Christians can live out, live out the gospel and really be a light to others, so that even if we're not in their family or whatever, that hopefully by our actions they will be able to go, something's different. Maybe maybe they see Christians or people with religion as experiencing more joy, and they themselves are drawn to it. It's really interesting to see people, even friends that I've had growing up, and to see how religion affects those people different and kind of the outcome of their lives.
Right, absolutely.
It's really fascinating. One thing I thought was interesting on this study also was just regarding how the differences between the parties, specifically Republicans and Democrats, and generally Republicans are viewed as being, this survey showed that Republicans are more religious friendly, whereas Democrats are not. And I can only think about with one of the elections, right, where they decided, I think it was President Obama's second election, where they decided to not mention God or say a prayer or something. I don't remember what it was. There was a huge upheaval, right? It was all about the Democratic Party. And I think that obviously the view of the public shows that as well. So I thought that was right in line with what I had expected. Yeah,
and it's interesting too if you just look at some of the attacks on religious freedom and some of the this administration has really been pushing in an unprecedented way. It is a big concern, and we need people from both parties to stand up, whether you come at it from a Democratic approach or a Republican approach. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. God shouldn't be a partisan issue. So we really need to start looking at it not as a Republican versus Democrat issue, but
it needs to be a bipartisan effort.
Exactly.
It does. It needs to be a bipartisan effort. And again, it's just so important for us to elect officials that follow those good moral teachings and will support, traditional marriage and all those things.
Absolutely.
So. All right. Coming up after the break, we have a special guest joining us to discuss a prominent celebrity wedding.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to Heroic Media. We're here this segment with prominent blogger and Heroic Media news director, Jenny Eubing. Jenny, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
And we're going to be discussing the following story. Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie recently married at their private estate in France. The civil marriage led some to label the union as the ultimate gift to their children. So what were your first impressions? I love their family. I think it's a nice mix of, adopted children and their own children. What were your impressions?
Yeah, I mean, they literally have gone to the ends of the earth to assemble this family. They've had 3 adopted, 3 bio kids, and they've definitely been in the spotlight. But as a couple, they have, for the last decade or so, been raising this family as just a partnership.
Right.
So they haven't been married, and Angelina Jolie comes out of a broken home herself and has gone into some great detail about just how that affected her as a young woman and how that really that lack of stability that she felt from her parents' divorce is really what drove her into some of her crazier behaviors in her younger life. So you can see from one angle that she was probably a bit reticent to walk down the aisle herself, seeing what had happened with her parents. But I think it's so beautiful that the article actually went and pointed out that it was her children who really pushed. They were like, Mom and Dad, we want to be a family. We are a family. We want to honor that.
Yeah.
So
what does that do then for the stability of this family, given that, you know, Angelina Jolie didn't have that stability growing up? Do you think that will contribute to the probability that these children will grow up in a more stable lifestyle?
Oh, absolutely. And I think probably instinctively, her adopted children might have felt that more acutely, that desire for it to be official, for it to be on paper. And of course, they belonged by law to each of their parents. And now the whole family belongs to one another by giving some legitimacy through a marriage. And there's absolutely so much research. It's almost hard to start with just one, but there was a landmark study, The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce, 25-year landmark study by Judith Wallerstein, and she explored some of the fallout from children of divorce and found that the number one predictor for kids' healthy development was for the parents to be raising them in a stable marriage.
Yeah.
Both parents present, marriage intact, that was the number one factor.
Yeah.
I think that's huge. And that same study actually looked at the results of divorce, and it said that one of the things, it said that it's in adulthood that children of divorce suffer the most. And it was saying that when these children of divorced parents grow up, they're trying to go out and get married and form relationships, but they don't have this clear image of a stable mother and father relationship, this man and woman, and those memories really haunt them, and they can make it very difficult. And so it sort of becomes a cycle. So it's good to have, I think, actions like this that can break that cycle and say, you know what, just because this happened with my parents, I want to do better. I want to really try to keep this intact.
Absolutely. And it's a really beautiful statement to make to their children.
Yes.
That, you know, you're worth it, and we understand that you want something more from our family. You crave this permanence, and I think it really was a brave move on her part, especially to overcome that.
I thought it was cool that the kids were the ones that really started pushing this too. I thought it was neat because it almost like was a natural feeling for the kids to be like, hey, why aren't you guys married? Like, you know, it's just natural for that type of familial relationship and that commitment to be made. And you know, your actions really do, like you mentioned, Michelle, they really affect and influence your children so much. And like you mentioned in the study for over 25 years, it's like, you know, you see what your parents do. And I'm sure all of us have at least once said, you know, oh my gosh, I'm becoming like my dad, or I'm becoming like my mom or something, right? Because you're really influenced by those people that you spend all that time with. And yeah, the marriage really has a huge influence on those children and the upbringing of those children. Now, one thing I thought was interesting about this marriage was, like, unlike most celebrity marriages, they're very lavish and extravagant. This was like relatively low key for a celebrity, right?
Yeah.
It seems like so many times today we focus, like, all these celebrity weddings, it's like the ceremony that's the focus. But really for this marriage, it seemed like it was really the children and the family were the focus, you know?
Yeah. So I mean, even though they kind of backed into it, and it's not perhaps the ideal model.
Right.
You know, you have half a dozen children who are pushing you down the aisle,
Right.
almost literally. But there is something beautiful that natural desire and that natural virtue, almost unbeknownst to them, is what propelled them to take this step. And I also thought it was really worth noting that there's the least chance for abandonment for children who are raised in an intact marriage. And I think for kids who are coming out of an adoptive situation, that would perhaps be especially, you know, on their hearts. And so for them to ask mom and dad, like, can you guys please take this step? Like, we really want to know.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, does it divorce-proof them? Absolutely not. But it's a beautiful witness to their children, and it's a beautiful witness to kind of the crazy culture that they're raising their family in. If nothing else, they're saying, hey guys, it's worth it. It's worth it to be married, and we think it's important, and it's an important step we're going to take for our family.
Right, absolutely.
Jenny, do you think that this will have any impact on the culture? I saw a study recently that said that really high numbers, almost unprecedentedly high numbers of Americans are choosing just not to get married. They just sort of live together by default. Do you think that high-profile celebrity weddings like this might influence other people to say, hey, maybe we should get married. Maybe there is still some value in marriage?
I would hope that could be the case. I don't think that necessarily there's going to be like a rush for a copycat dress for her interesting gown with her kids' drawings all over the back of it. But I do think that it's some momentum in the right direction, because for every 100 celebrity weddings you read about, a month later there's 99 divorce stories in the same tabloid. So it's great to see a couple who has been together for a while take that step and hopefully give their peers and their children something to think over, and like, well, hey, if it's just a piece of paper and if it's just a matter of like going down and signing some documents, why would they have gone to the trouble? I mean, it's something more than that, and I think they know that on a natural level.
Right, and that's exactly it too. You know, like as human beings, we have our faults, and you know, we suffer from the effects of sin, and so we need God in that relationship with that marriage in order to give us the grace to allow that relationship to last. You know, till our lives are over.
And these kids are extremely wealthy. This is a family who will never have to want for anything.
Right.
So why then was it necessary for them to do the whole?
Right.
You know?
It hints at something more.
It does hint at something more. They gave them absolutely the greatest gift that no amount of money or celebrity could have guaranteed, and that's for their parents to commit to each other.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jenny. We really appreciate you sharing your opinion on this and your insight and everything. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, and congratulations, Brangelina.
Stay tuned. We'll have one more story after the break. Welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Michelle Bauman.
And I'm Patrick Cordova.
In our final story for today, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is raising eyebrows with her comments on abortion and poor people.
Yikes.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Not something necessarily that you'd expect from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I guess, just being a prominent public figure. But yeah, maybe you can let everybody know a little bit more about what exactly happened, because there might be some confusion about things.
Yeah, so it was in an interview, and the comment that she made was, it makes no sense as a national policy to promote birth only among poor people.
Right.
And the point that she was making was that everybody else needs to pay for poor people's abortions, because if they can't get abortions and the rich people can, it's not fair. But the way she made the statement led some people to question, well, why do you not want to promote birth among poor people? Is that sort of a eugenics move? Are you trying to get rid of poor people?
Right.
So I don't know that that's entirely taking her statement in context. I'm not sure that that's entirely what she was saying.
Right.
But I think that this raises a really important point about eugenics and abortion.
Absolutely.
And if we just look at the history of Planned Parenthood and we look at the history of legal abortion in this country, there's a very strong eugenics element.
Absolutely. There certainly is a link, and I think it's always good to just kind of get back to the basics. And the reason that, especially with eugenics and abortion, it's why is it wrong, right? And as Catholics, as Christians, right, we value human life. Every single human person has an innate, inherent dignity. And we're created in the image of God, and it always makes sense to me thinking that the devil really wants people to do this, right? To abort their baby and have this eugenics mindset, because it just takes that many more images of God out of the world, right? And I mean, there's so many different aspects of that. I think why the devil wants those types of actions, us to carry out those types of actions, but scientifically proven that when a sperm meets an egg, there's a unique human person at that point, right? The moment of conception, there's a human life.
Right.
And so it's undeniable scientific evidence that a human person is created there. And obviously, as Catholics and Christians who follow the teachings of God, we have to value that human life. So we can't say that, just because a woman doesn't think that it's a human being, or just because she doesn't care that it's a human being, right? From our story from last week, there is still, that person is still a human being and demands respect
Absolutely, absolutely. That's key. And I think it's good that you go back and look at those basic principles, because when we apply it to this case, you know, looking at eugenics, well, what about the poor people? What about the disabled people? Any group that you want, or you get into some of these racial, you know, like, oh, well, we don't really want those populations kind of thing.
Exactly.
And that's actually what we see. Did you know that the black community makes up about 13% of the American population? 13%.
Right.
But they account for more than a third, 36% of abortions.
Wow.
So it's very disproportionate. Guess who's dying the most? The black baby, the little black babies.
Exactly.
You know, the black community is suffering disproportionately.
Yep.
In addition, did you know that 79% of Planned Parenthood's surgical abortion facilities are walking distance from African American or Hispanic neighborhoods?
Wow.
79%. Who are they targeting?
Well, I mean, that's how everything started, right? With Margaret Sanger and everything. She totally had the philosophy of, hey, she totally had a eugenics mindset, right? She was completely against minorities spreading, right? She almost viewed them as a disease.
Oh, yeah. If you look at Hitler's language and you look at Margaret Sanger's language, it's the same language.
It's the same
It
stuff.
really is. We need to exterminate. It's the language of extermination.
It
It's
is.
cleaning up the filth. And this is still, it's still going on. This is the legacy of Planned Parenthood that it brings us today.
Right. Yes.
And so you have these minority communities that are disproportionately affected by abortion, by the murder of these children and the scars on women. You see the emotional trauma, the depression, the elevated rates of suicide, the problems with future fertility and physical medical issues. We're putting minority women at higher risk for all of that and saying, we're celebrating this in the name of choice.
Yeah, in the name of choice, and that's the whole thing that is just so bothersome about it, is that it's sold as like this thing, like, oh, you're going to feel so free and so good, and you're going to get everything you want, and you're not going to have to worry about anything, and it's the right choice, you know, and it's sold as this package of, you know, this is what's going to make you happy.
Exactly.
And it's not, and statistics and everything else show that. And so we have to remember, you know, I think we have to really, I'm glad you brought up the whole history of things, because we have to remember that, you know, where this came from and what the mindset was. And I really think your points regarding the location of Planned Parenthood facilities and everything is just proof of what the ultimate goal of this is, too, you know? And it doesn't seem to me like it's changed much. But the language has changed to make it seem like that's not what's going on.
Right, and that's the thing. There's so much language involved here, and even now we see the shift away from choice and into reproductive health and freedom, and just sort of these vague terms, and you know, you sort of see it for what it is.
Same stuff, different wrapper.
Yep.
All right, that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you.
Please feel free to write to us with any comments, questions, or news tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please check out our website at heroicmedianews.org, where you can read more stories like the ones we discussed on this episode.
That's all for today. Until next time, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.